room today, and I'll be making this vinyl project pouch. And it's kind of like a little to-go bag for your projects. It's clear, it has a zipper, and it's roomy enough to bring your tools and some supplies if you're traveling or going to a class, what have you. And I'll also show you how to make this attached wristlet, and then I'll spend some time showing you how to add the binding. So let's get started. I'll show you how to make it. You'll want to choose at least 2 or 3 fabrics. You can see in my sample, I've used 3 fabrics. I've used one for the lining, one for the fabric around the zipper, the binding, and the wristlet, and then a 3rd fabric for the backing. You'll also need a piece of vinyl for the front, and you'll cut your vinyl one piece 12.5 inches by 10 inches. And this particular vinyl I'm using is a 16 gauge vinyl, and it just has a piece of tissue paper on the back. You'll need 1 zipper, and this one I'm using today is 14 inches. And you can go bigger, but probably not any smaller than 14 inches. Cut 2 fabrics at 13 inches by 13 inches square. One will be for your backing and one will be for your lining. Cut 1 piece of batting at 13 by 13 inches square, and I'm using Pellon Fusible Thermolam Plus. This is fusible on one side, and you don't have to use fusible. I happen to really like this product, so I'll use that today. But we are going to be quilting the fabric onto the batting, so it does not have to be fusible. For the fabric around the zipper, you'll cut 2 pieces, one at 12.5 inches by 6 inches and one at 12.5 inches by 4 inches. For the wristlet, you'll cut 2 pieces of fabric, one at 13 inches by 2 inches and one at 1.5 inches by 2 inches. You'll also need a piece of interfacing, cut that at 13 inches by 1 inch. And I'm using a Pellon product number 808 called Craft Fuse. And then finally you'll need a D-ring and a swivel clip, and I'm using the 1/2 inch sizes. And you can see on my cutting mat how they measure that. This measures out right at about 1/2 inch, and this swivel clip measures from top to bottom about 1.5 inches. And you'll need binding strips cut at 2.5 inches wide by approximately 65 inches long, and I'll piece those together and show you how to do that. And how I came up with 65 inches is each of these sides is going to measure 12.5 inches, so that's 50 inches total, and then I just added 15 inches, so I had a little extra for my corners and for joining the ends. The first thing I'll do is draw some quilting lines on my backing fabric, and I'm just using a water-soluble marking pencil, and I have my ruler placed just right down the center of my backing fabric, and I'll just draw a line. And again, this will be a quilting line. And I'm using white, hoping that it'll show up. And then I'll just repeat that about every 2.5 inches across on either side of that line. I have all my quilting lines drawn, and all I did was draw some lines straight and then some on the diagonal. Now I'll create my quilt sandwich. I'll layer my fabrics now, and I'll have my fusible side facing my lining fabric. You can have it facing any direction you want, but I'll be fusing it to this because I really don't want to be pressing on here too much because it might make my quilting lines disappear. So then I'll put that face down. I'll take it to the iron and I'll fuse this together. Just give it a little spritz of water. I have an open-toed presser foot, and I've changed my thread so I have a matching purple thread. And I've got my gloves on. And these gloves are grippy on the back, but yet I can still use my fingertips to to make sure everything is nice and smooth. So I'll just tuck that thread out of the way. And again, it's just easy straight line quilting, smoothing as I go. And I'll just keep on following my quilting lines. I have all my quilting done. I ended up just doing 10 lines total. And now, since I cut it originally at 13 inches, I'll trim the quilt sandwich down to 12.5 inches square. And since I have a 12.5 inch square ruler, I'll just use that to square up my block. And if you don't have one of these, you can use a regular ruler and a cutting mat. I'll set this aside and work on the zipper and vinyl. I have my 2 zipper fabrics, and I'll start with the wider one, the 12.5 by 6. And with this one, simply fold in half, wrong sides together, and press. And set that one aside. Now the 12.5 by 4, press in half, wrong sides together. And this one we're going to continue pressing like you would press a strap. So just fold these long edges into the center crease. And give that a press. And then fold one more time. Now I'll take the vinyl piece, I'll remove the tissue paper, and I'll just sandwich that right in here onto my smaller zipper trim piece. Snug it right up in there. And I'll just use a couple clips to hold that in place. I'll take it to the sewing machine and I'll sew along this edge right here, closest to the vinyl, about 1/4 inch. And then I'll come back and sew a second line about 1/8 inch. Now that that's all sewn, I will attach the vinyl to the zipper. And at this point, you just want to decide which direction you want your zipper to open. And I want mine to open from the left to the right, so I have my zipper tab right here. And you just kind of center it. And if you want, you can glue or pin. I'm just going to use my hands and hold it together at the sewing machine. I have my zipper foot attached, and I have my vinyl with the zipper trim to my left. And I'm just going to position so there's just a little bit of room between the zipper teeth and where I'm sewing. And you can use your own judgment on that. And then I'll simply line up the edge of my presser foot with the edge of this zip trim piece. And I just kind of go slow and adjust the placement of this zipper as I go so I can get it as even as possible. And I think I'll go ahead and tie off. Now I have my other zip trim piece, and you want the folded edge on top of the zipper. And you just want to do the same exact thing, use your zipper foot, and you just want to try to get this as even as possible. Now I'll layer my vinyl with my zipper attached to my quilt sandwich, and I'll line it up along the top edge right here. And place a couple clips. And along the bottom you can see there's excess vinyl. I did that intentionally, so when I go ahead and sew, I'll be sewing 1/8 of an inch all the way around, and I'll follow my quilt sandwich line right along here and then trim that vinyl off after. Before I sew my 1/8 of an inch along the edge, I'll prepare my wristlet tab, this right here, and I'll place that tab right about here. So let me go ahead and show you how to make that wristlet tab now. I have my 2 pieces for the wristlet and my interfacing here. I'll start with my small tab, and all I'll do is fold it wrong sides together, meeting with the short ends. And crease. And then fold into the crease. And press again. I'll just give it a little spray of water. And I'll set that one aside. Now my longer strap, I'll have the wrong side facing up, and I'll attach my interfacing. And this is fusible. There's a little shiny side on this one. And I'm actually going to trim it so it's a little bit shorter than my strap. And this just gives a little structure to the wristlet. Now I'll finish by doing exactly what I did with my little tab. Fold into my crease. Now before I sew along the edge of my strap, I'll feed it through my swivel clip, like so. And then I will sew the ends together. I'll open it back up, right sides together. I'll take it to the machine and I'll sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance right along here. Press that seam open. And refold. And you may want to use a couple clips to keep it closed. I'll take it to the machine. I'll sew an 1/8 inch seam allowance all around my folded edge. And I'll also, with my smaller tab, I'll do the same thing, an 1/8 inch right along here. I'll start with my small tab. Now I'll feed in my strap. And I'll clip off where I started with my little tab here. Set that aside. And secure where you stop sewing, where you meet up where you began. And if you want, you can sew another line of stitching on the other side. I think I'll do that off camera. And then I will show you how to attach the small tab to the vinyl pouch. I have my little tab all ready. I will feed it through my D-ring and just fold it in half so these ends meet. I will just clip it in place. And this is just a rough clip. I'll move it around a little bit as I'm sewing around the pouch. Just clip it right like that. Now I'm ready to take it to the machine, sew an 1/8 inch around all 4 sides. And at this point, you just want to make sure your zipper is somewhere in the center of your pouch. And as I mentioned, I'll be sewing around the bottom here at the edge. And then I will trim off my vinyl, and then I'll trim off the zipper ends. And I'll start sewing along my top edge. And again, an 1/8 inch seam allowance. Just kind of keep smoothing it as you go. Now I'll remove my clip with my wristlet tab attached, realign everything, and just go nice and slow over your tab here. And I just keep smoothing, and then when I get to my zipper, again, very slowly. Depending on what kind of zipper you're using, you want to be careful about stitching through the teeth of the zipper. And I just go really slowly. Make sure it's nice and smooth and continue on. Now I'm coming up to my zipper, and at this point I just want to make sure that my teeth are closed, or right next to each other I should say, and I have my zipper tab over here, and I just want to kind of smooth it out and just use my stiletto if I have any little puckers or anything. And then I will tie off. Now I'll trim off my zipper ends and my excess vinyl along the bottom. Just use my ruler. And again, depending on what kind of zipper you're using, just be really careful when you're trimming. Now it's all ready for the binding, and I'll show you how to make that binding now. I have 2 strips of 2.5 inches wide, and they measure together about 70 inches, so I need to join these 2 strips together. I think I mentioned you want at least about 65 inches of binding. And I'll join these by placing right sides together. And I'll line up this top edge here, and I'll just pin up in the corner. And then I'll draw a stitching line from this corner to this corner. And joining the strips in this way makes a lot less bulk at your seam when you're sewing on your binding. I'll take it to the machine and I'll sew right along here on my stitching line. Now I'll cut about 1/4 inch along here. And I'll press this seam open. And I'll trim off this little dog ear here. Now I'll fold my strip in half, wrong sides together, and you can see now that you have one part of your seam over here and one part over here. So it's just a lot easier to sew on, or to sew over, I should say. Today I'll show you how to attach the binding from the front side and then fold it around to the back. So basically all you do is match your raw edge to raw edge. I'll start at the bottom of my pouch and I'll just clip it. And I'll start sewing right around my clip. I want to leave this little tail free for joining at the end. So I'll take it to the machine and I'll sew 1/4 inch seam allowance all along, and then I'll show you when we get to the corner how to fold it and continue on. And I want to secure my stitches at the beginning. Just keep it nice and straight. And as you come up to the corner, we're actually going to tie off our thread. So I just kind of make sure I know where the end of my pouch is. And I want to stop 1/4 inch before that end. And this presser foot has these little red lines on it, which is indicating the 1/4 inch. So I'll line that up with the end of my pouch. One more stitch. And then I'll tie off. And remove it. Now I'll fold the strip. So you want a diagonal fold right here to your corner. And you want it straight across in this direction. And then I just kind of finger press it. And then fold it back down. And align this fold with the top, or actually the bottom. And I just hold it. If you want, you could always clip it. So now it's all aligned again. And just continue right on with your 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I like to secure with a back stitch. And continue on till you get to the next corner and repeat that process. I'm coming up to another corner, so I'm tying off. And then I'll show you that fold one more time. So you just fold at a diagonal. Have this straight across and this at a diagonal, and fold to be even along your edge. Hold it or clip it. And again, start with the corner, right at the corner, 1/4 inch seam allowance, and secure. And continue on. And I'm at the corner with the wristlet tab, and I just wanted to show you, just make sure it's tucked out of the way, And you just do the same exact thing with your folding, and take it a little slowly as you have quite a few layers right here. I just got past my final corner before I'm back to the place where I started, so I'm tying off my thread. Okay, here's where I started. Here's my tail of where I finished. So now all I'll do is fold this tail to meet this one. And I'll actually make it just a little short because by the time I finish messing with this, I tend to stretch out my fabric a little bit. So I'm going to have about 1/8 of an inch gap right there, and I'll just finger press it. Now from my fold, I'll measure 2.5 inches, which is this line right here, and I'll draw a line. And the 2.5 inches is the width of my binding strip. So if you cut your binding strips at 2 inches, you would measure 2 inches from this fold. Now cut on your drawn line. And discard your tail. Now open up your strips. And you're going to place them right sides together at a right angle and pin those in place. Just line it up like that. Now just get it nice and flat. And we're going to be sewing from this outside edge here to this outside edge here, a diagonal line. So I'll just put a little diagonal mark right here with my pencil. And then this one, we just want to make sure our mark is right where the other fabric underneath is. You can see that. Just draw a line like that. Now I'll take my ruler and put it right at those marks and draw a line connecting the marks. And I'm using a mechanical pencil here. And I'll take it to the machine. I'll sew right on my drawn line. And I just kind of make sure I keep it lined up with my edges lined up, and then it's smooth. I'll remove my pins. And before I clip this apart, I'll just make sure that I didn't have any twists or anything and it folds properly. So I'll just refold it. And that looks good. So now I will clip off this excess. And just about 1/4 inch. Now I'll refold, and you can see it kind of got a little stretched out from my handling it. That's why I like to leave that little gap I showed you earlier. And I'll just try to crisp up that edge a little bit. Okay, now I'll take it to the machine and I'll continue on with my 1/4 inch right along here. And I'll start sewing right where I left off, and I'll secure my stitches. Just keep it lined up as I go. And I'm coming up to where I started. Just try to meet that the best I can and tie off. Now I'll fold the binding all the way around to the back. And the stitch lines, all you want to do is make sure you cover your stitch line in the back and clip. And here's the corner. You can see how nice they turned out. And I just kind of fold it in the back like so. You can see that. And clip. And I'll just continue around clipping, just checking to make sure I'm covering up those stitches in the back. And I try to make sure I have an even amount of binding edge here and on the back. I have all my clips in place. That's what the back looks like. Before I start my stitching in the ditch, I wanted to show you a couple things that you might consider doing in addition to the clips. You could use a glue stick and glue along where you'll be sewing. The other thing you can do is, and also I would still use the clip. Just hold that down like so. The other thing you can do is take a pin and insert it right in the where you'll be sewing in the stitch in the ditch and pop it out. Make sure it's popped out within the binding itself and not going off here. Like so. And usually when I do binding, I've started doing this technique with the glue, the pins, and the clips. It takes a little time, but you get a really beautiful result. The other thing you can do, of course, is hand sew your binding. That's always an option. But today I'll go ahead and show you the stitch in the ditch. I have an open-toed presser foot so I can really see the seam line that I want to stitch in. I'll lower my needle and pull up that bobbin thread. I'll show you how I stitch in the ditch, and I just use my stiletto here to kind of push apart the seam line just a little bit. Not to distort it, but just to give me a nice place to sew in. And I go pretty slowly. So I'll continue on. I will sew the same exact way all the way around my pouch. And I'm coming up to where I started. And I will tie off my threads. And then I will bury these threads off camera. And here's a close-up of how the binding turned out. And the zipper inside of the pouch and the wristlet. There you have it, a vinyl project pouch. And just by changing up the dimensions of this, you could turn it into a pencil pouch, a makeup pouch, really lots and lots of different projects just using this one pattern. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.